Welcome again to Palava, our podcast discussion of simple yet deep questions. In the previous episode, we left off at the point where I'd offered my answer to the deceptively simple yet very deep question that I was asked by my Chinese host at the end of my 11-day visit in China. Early into the visit, during our business formal set piece meeting, we had totally abandoned English as a means of communication. And my host did all his oration in a burst of Chinese. And fortunately enough, I was prepared for this eventuality and that carried along in my entourage an interpreter from Tanzania who enabled me to reciprocate in kind by speaking totally in Kiswahili. This one act had the profound effect on my host in the sense that he cleared his diary and decided to offer me the freedom of the land, whereupon he took me all over China, but at the end of our final dinner, he gathered the courage to ask me this question that had been nagging him for a while. Okay, if you recall, I had asked him, okay, can you illustrate what you mean by this question? What does it, how does it translate to you guys in China? And he had said, for them, they're about equilibrium. They're about balance. They seek balance. They understand that every conversation has two sides. You know, there's night and day, there's yin and yang, there's evil and good, and all that stuff. I then explained to him that unlike colonial societies, for us, the concept that we are about deeply as a people over time, and to this day, much as we don't acknowledge and rally around it, but we are going to do that as a part of this series, is this concept of multiplicity, which goes deeper than the word that is the flavor of the day, which is called diversity. And so we are not talking about diversity and inclusion and those sorts of things. And so we steer clear of this word diversity. So, and I explained that Africans, unlike societies that, no offense, but they're colonial, we are at a deep and cultural and philosophical level. We are not about hegemony. We are not about monopoly. We are not about monoculture. We are not about monolingualism. We are about multiplicity. Now, from today's episode going forward, we want to break down what this multiplicity means and how does it apply, collectively. How does it apply to our daily lives? How does it apply to our approach? How does it express itself in the African worldview? We have to know ourselves before we now face the rest of the world when we are trying to find our feet in this emerging new world order that's unfolding before our very eyes. Well, when I offered this answer, it had a good effect on my host because he thanked me and says that I knew from the off that it was worth spending time to get to know you. And you've given me an insight that I do not believe any amount of books and encyclopedias and lectures and expositions would have given me. And therefore, I'm sticking with it. I'm offering it up as a straw man. Everybody who will get involved in this discussion, really feel free to deconstruct it, to discuss it, to let's stress test it so that we can converge around this concept and then express it so that we find a genuinely African philosophical worldview. We need to rebuild what our ancestors bequeathed us. and which has generally been destroyed through education systems and whatever it is. At the end of each Palava episode, because we are not only about discussion. As Africans, we are very good at analysis. We are very good at identifying what the problems are, what the root causes of those problems are, identifying whose fault it is, and apportioning blame. We want to go beyond that. And in each episode, I would like us to identify some simple actions, what we call in marketing a call to action. So I'll suggest some calls to action. Right away, the first call to action is join, join this discussion, subscribe to it, become a member when we start developing such schemes, participate in live events and discussions and workshops, reach out if you need a view on how do we develop an approach on a continental basis to resolve some of our problems of today. Okay, so prepare yourself. This is going to be what we would call an epic journey. By that I mean it's going to be long, it's going to be adventurous, it's going to be slow, maybe, it's going to be laborious or arduous, but in the end, it's going to be heroic because we will come out, we will emerge victorious in defining our rightful place in this emerging world order. If something is strategic, it's not something that you do once and you abandon. It's not for today. It's not about us today trying to consume as much as we can. It's about our children's children and our lineage going forward. Okay, but as we take our first step today on this epic quest, we have to establish one very important ground rule. And this rule is that from now onwards, whatever we say, whatever we do, whatever we write, we must first think for ourselves. We must first think for ourselves. And here is why. Multiple layers of Western education, some might call it Western miseducation, it has stopped us from thinking for ourselves. Let's make no bones about it. This is by design. Because these education systems that we inherited, and we are still pursuing it, just tinkering around the edges and all that stuff, but we are still, kind of reading traditional textbooks. I'm an Anglophile. I love Shakespeare as much as anybody. And I really, like the literature and the language and all that stuff. Nevertheless, the education system that I underwent did not teach me to think for myself, but it taught me what to think. So, as we embark on this journey, there's a lot of baggage that we've got to jettison. We just got to drop it. Otherwise, we will start our journey bearing a burden of junk, cultural junk. I'm not talking about science and all those sorts of things, which belongs to the old world anyway. But I'm talking about European, Western inspired cultural junk, which is now called slop. We've got to leave it as we embark on this African Palava journey. Let me give you an example. If we start trying to answer this question about what are we about, and we base our findings on what have others written about us, and then we synthesize that and arrive at an answer, honestly, we will have totally missed the boat. We can't make it that way. So we cannot define ourselves based on what other people define us as. First of all, we cannot define ourselves based on what colonial institutions or colonialist institutions would want to define us as. Okay, it's obvious, I don't need to belabor it, that as someone who's moved from house to house, from Nairobi to London to Surrey to West Sussex to Amsterdam and all this stuff, every time you move, you have a problem leaving behind stuff that you will not need in your new house just because you get attached to it. You know, maybe the toys of the kids, they've outgrown them, many of them they'll never use. But somehow you still find them still in the new place. Not to say if you're downsizing from, say, a bungalow or whatever it is with a compound and a garden and all that stuff, and kids have flown the nest, you're moving into an apartment or a penthouse or whatever, you still find that, oh, wow, there's an item of garden furniture that you're so attached to, you're not going with it. That is difficult. Now imagine how difficult it is when concepts that you've accepted as reality, that have been fed to you repeatedly from birth through education to your corporate career, these things seep into your subconscious. It becomes part of you. And here we are at Afrika Palava. We are saying we all collectively, we have to drop that baggage. We have to set our minds back to factory settings across the board. We are going back, and we are going to start from there and then build our understanding of the world based on what is authentically African values, culture, and traditions. What we are about, in other words. Now, there's a weakness that you might point out, because here I am talking about this stuff, but I'm speaking in English. And we are going to use English and French, maybe, but let's use it as a tool to transmit our ideas from one person to another, pretty much as I did it in China. So that's what we're going to do. But this comes with a huge health warning, because we have to recognize that English and other European languages, they have set booby traps for us in the form of words that we have been taught to use without even interrogating what they mean. And I'm here to tell you that there are many words that do not mean what we think they mean to the guys that like to use them. So while we go on this journey, we'll have to be very nimble and sidestep a lot of these landmines. And eventually, we're going to come up with our own style guide, or, kind of almost like our own dictionary of words that we are never going to use, simply because they do not position us in true light. I'm going to venture right out. We are going to come, of course, with experts in these domains, such as linguists and those sorts of guys. But straight out, I can tell you from experience that there are words like donor countries that we have to steer clear of, because there are many guys that we just say, yeah, those are the donors, they've arrived. But when you start checking what have they ever donated, you find that, well, they've given you a loan. Is that a donation? Okay, that's gonna be a couple of episodes where we tear this down and we just discuss it with guys who've spent some time discussing language and how it mirrors who we are and what we think about. Another challenge we have as we start the journey is that our best brains are kind of our very top guys have climbed that greasy pole purely because they mimic whatever they've been taught. So, if you're an academic who these are guys who will have to participate really and take their rightful place in terms of giving us thoughts, synthesizing what we're about and writing about them. I know we as an African people, we shy away from writing. The output of the UK in a single year of books is multiple times more than the output of 1.4 billion Africans across the whole continent. It's something we have to think about. But I'm saying that the guys who will have to decontaminate their minds as we move forward are the very guys who are going to participate actively in this discussion. I'm one of them. But I'm prepared to just question everything. And I invite you to do the same. As we go forward, there's one thing that let me put out. I'm just emphasizing this thing because it is critical, this ground rule. Because of just liking to read widely, curiosity and all, I came across a guy called Immanuel Kant, born in 1724 and he died in 1804. Now, Immanuel Kant is Europe's most important, or one of them, most important philosophers. Yeah? His ideas remain valid, or they remain in force to this day in Western thinking. Now, Kant himself says this. He said he defined immaturity. He says, you know what immaturity is? Immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without guidance from another. In other words, we have to grow up. Now, when I mention Kant, I have to tell you at the same time that some of his ideas I vehemently do not accept. I disagree totally with some of the things that Immanuel Kant wrote. This is because some of his concepts are so deep, they underpin this deeply racial, entrenched Western outlook that prevails to this day. I'm quoting him just to demonstrate that you can read these guys and you can pick out the good, some things that resonate, and push back and recognize the origins of some of these very deep instinct, almost become instinctive in some people, that they think in a racially tinged manner. That's not really about, we are not like that. We are not like that. And so you read people like Kant with a deep health warning. But the other point that I'd mention as we speak about him is that I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of these European and traditions do not practice what they preach. Yeah? They don't practice what they preach. So this think for yourself dictum did not stretch into the colonial education system, where Africans, the trickle that started to be permitted to get some education, whatever they were taught is not what the European societies were teaching their own kids, because there they were starting with think for yourself. For us, it was how do we prepare these guys not to become a threat and take over their own land and their own, kind of societies from us. So we've got to be careful. Do we really want these guys to be educated? Do we want them to think deeply about what's in their interests? And the answer was a resounding no. Therefore, our education never taught us how to think. It did not start from Kant's definition of maturity that you must think for yourself. It taught us what to think, not how to think. So, I want to say this and move on now because I'm still speaking at high level because of this ground rule that from now on our discussions are going to be, some of them will be so different from what we believe we know. But the reason they'll be different from what we believe we know is that what we know is not true. So we've got to define our own truth. I'm going back right now to multiplicity. And because I promised that in this episode we're going to start. As we break down this multiplicity thing, I want to list a few areas because everything is interrelated from an African worldview. Everything is kind of compartmentalized into narrow disciplines. The narrower, the better from a Western outlook point of view. So people will say, why are you commenting on economic matters and you're not an economist? Or why are you telling us about fixing cars? You're not a mechanic. While, knowledge is, everything is interrelated, particularly in an African cultural context. So let's just go through the list and put a bit of distinction between African multiplicity kind of worldview and the homogenized kind of Western driven worldview that we are put upon to adopt. I'm starting with language because that's a critical one. African society is a multilingual society. So the word multi comes in. European societies are monolingual. And if you read, let's say, the newspapers, whether it's in Germany, in France, particularly UK, and UK I read because that's where I live. So almost every week there's a discussion on why are these guys who have come from other countries, why are they speaking their own language? They must speak English. The same in America, incidentally. I think you guys, whoever follows current affairs, you know what I'm talking about. That these institutions, they just don't like it if somebody speaks their own indigenous language, unless that indigenous language happens to be English. It was reported in the Daily, I think it was Daily Mail or even the Times and the Guardian, that a very senior politician in the UK, they had somebody speaking Welsh in Wales. And they told the person, speak English, Otherwise, go back to where you came from. This person happened to look a bit like from the Indian subcontinent. But she had grown up there. She was half Welsh and all that stuff. So she was speaking in Welsh and got told off in the train for speaking Welsh. So I'm just saying that doesn't happen in Africa. You can jump in from Spain, you've come, nobody's going to ask you, by the way, why are you speaking Spanish? Or why are you speaking Kikongo or Lingala while we don't speak that language? That is a matter we will come back to. Let's go to culture now. African culture is multicultural. We welcome visitors everywhere. I have been in West Africa. One time I was in the north of Cote d'Ivoire, approaching Burkina Faso, going up north. And I visited one of the markets there. And one of the women who had a stall there believed that I was her nephew who had left decades before and gone for further education in Paris. And she was very pleased that I had come back to see them. And that dropped the scales from my eyes because I had come from this thing of, oh my God, there's a big difference between a Francophone African and an Anglophone African. Guys, it's a mess. We cannot define ourselves that way. Yeah. So African society is multicultural. Western society is monocultural, right? It's monocultural. If you want a Swedish passport, for instance, I have not applied for one. And later on, we will hope to have people who are from Sweden to kind of speak to these matters, or from Holland or from wherever. But suppose I want a Dutch passport. I've lived there maybe for 10 years or whatever. You have to undergo a language test. They're not just going to say, "Oh, welcome, you're now one of us," and you don't speak our language. You'll not get that passport if you've been in your own world and flying back and forth and speaking to your family in your own language. Therefore, you're not proficient. In Africa, I'm yet to hear that if you're a naturalized whatever of these artificial countries we have, that they'll subject you to a local language test. It doesn't even occur to us. We're like, well, you're African. Anyway, so multicultural versus monocultural. Let's take religion and spirituality, which we spend a lot of time on. Traditional African belief is multi-faith. It is animistic. It is ancestral. We venerate a lot of things. And it's okay. Western religion is monotheistic. It's like you have to worship one God. Actually, you have to become a Christian. That's a discussion for another day. We are not going to discuss this today. It's a very thorny subject. Let's get even more. This is just for example. Some of these things we are not going to discuss because they are deeply personal things. You just now there is this issue of, as you come to culture and stuff like that, that many African traditional cultures were polygamous, as opposed to Western culture is monogamous. Now, I'm just putting out this contrast. I'm not saying 100%, but I'm laying it out that let us step back. Let us define what we're about. And then let's put it all together. And that's why I'm talking about multiplicity. Now, it's very interesting that there's a word that begins with mono, while another begins with multi. So think about it. When I went to secondary school, if you were in first form, there was this word called mono. It was not a good word. And so let's be suspicious of anything that is mono. The minute you go to seek some advice from whichever extension office you've gone to or some institute, and the first thing they tell you, you go to abandon your multi crops and all these things that you have, and plant only one. In other words, monoculture. Or cut down your trees. Those varieties, indigenous varieties, are too unruly, and plant one so that you have a monocultural, what they will now call a commercial forest, so that you can engage in the modern world. Guys, let's think about it. We are going to come to things like music, which define what we are about, because I enjoy music, I'm a guitarist and all that stuff. But African music is polyrhythmic. Yeah, so it's poly, but poly means multi. Rhythmic, cross rhythms. If you're new to it, you kind of even wonder whether there's any rhythm because it's kind of wild. European music, as we were taught, is by and large four, pa, 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 pa. If it is 3 by 4, then you've become quite adventurous. I'm not talking about jazz because that's African music, but it is regimental. You get what I mean? It is monorhythmic. They put that time signature there. That's what you've got from one end to the other. You just have to respect that time signature. Yeah, you don't vary that rhythm. That's not us. Okay, let's leave it there because we are going to break this thing down. But one very important one, which I think we are going to begin with because it's just so huge and we've got serious experts, but we've got a very deep strategic discussion to have. And that is the area of environment and all this green stuff that people who don't practice what they preach have all of a sudden waken up and they're now coming to us and saying, we've got a green agenda. Guys, environment, wildlife, indigenous conservation of indigenous species, indigenous wildlife, and all that stuff. We are not the poachers. The poachers are these guys who come to shoot our animals for fun. And they call themselves hunters, but what do they? I mean, come on. So that's a big discussion we are going to have because our guys are there. They have their cows and everything in the savannah there. They are walking on foot and they're mingling with all these wild animals and they're not, it's natural. While if you go there in your big Land Cruiser and you say, "Wow, I can see those guys are, they're just they're walking around," so you jump off the Land Cruiser to take a closer photograph. It's a disaster waiting to happen. I'm meandering a bit, but what I'm trying to say is that this multiplicity concept is what we're about. And therefore, the fact that we have eradicated a lot of our indigenous fauna, plants, and then replaced it with a single species over thousands of acres, let's say tea. So you look over this thing, and for a Mzungu, there's, wow, beautiful. Look at that uniformity across these undulating hills. It is great. Okay, I'm saying we are going to interrogate all these things, much as it is our colonial thing, and people just take it for granted. That's just the way it is. I'm going to leave it there today. And what I urge you to do as a call to action is before the next episode, just note down some of these contrasting areas where take multiplicity as our placeholder until the day we collectively knock it down and say, guys, that's not what we are about. Then fine, we'll have to find another conceptual hook. But this is it for now for African Palava. Please in, uh, join whatever forums, listen to these things, listen to back episodes, and above all, comment downstairs freely. Look out for books and publications that will come out. Participate in any live events that we are going to have. Reach out if you're in an environment where you want to operate across multiple African countries. You want to dig deeper into what African culture is about. Feel free to drop an email down there at africapalava.gmail or whatever, and we will have this discussion in an intense way as we go forward. Thank you for your attention. Sorry, no, that's somebody else's. So somebody else's sign off. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, thank you for listening, and see you at the next Palava. Bye bye.